Good evening and welcome, everyone. I'm Jonathan Binstock, MAG's Mary W. and Donald R. Clark Director. Thank you all so much for joining us virtually to celebrate the opening of the 613 by Archie Rand at the Memorial Art Gallery. Before we start tonight's program, I'd like to briefly mention some housekeeping items. First, we have a live captioner with us today. If you would like to see captions, you may click the closed captioning CC button at the bottom of your screen. Second, we'll have time for questions following the program. Please submit your questions at any time by clicking Q&A, also at the bottom of your screen. Finally, when this opening celebration concludes, your browser will take you to a short survey about your experience. Please let us know what you think. Your feedback is very important as we are always striving to be better at what we do. It is now my pleasure to introduce Holly Budd, the Executive Director of the Max and Marion Farish Charitable Foundation. We are so honored to have partnered with the Farish Foundation to bring this exhibition to Rochester. The Farish Foundation is the reason we are able to show this magnificent body of work at MAG and have Archie with us in Rochester. Holly, I cannot express how much I have been looking forward to seeing this vision come to life. It's been a challenge getting to this point. COVID has thrown us all more than a few curveballs. Thank you for your patience, your perseverance, and your incredible support. I will now pass the Zoom screen to you.
Good evening. On behalf of the Max and Marion Farish Charitable Foundation, welcome to this virtual opening of the 613 by Archie Rand. The foundation is proud to partner with the MAG to bring this exhibition to Rochester. And because we want this to be an experience that everyone can enjoy, the foundation is underwriting 4 days of open admission to the gallery during the exhibit. Our collaboration with Archie Rand goes beyond the 613. He's the second recipient of the Farish Fellowship for the Advancement of Jewish Humanities and Culture. Launched in 2018, the fellowship is an opportunity to honor an extraordinary Jewish luminary, celebrate their accomplishments, and through the fellowship, provide them a Shabbat for the soul to pursue their work. Our founders, Max and Marion Farish, were known for their commitment to the communities they held so dearly. It is in that spirit that we embark on this virtual tour, which allows you not only to experience the 613, but do so with the artist himself. And now, on with the show.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome. It's nice to have you here with us this evening. I am delighted to be here with the artist Archie Rand in the Memorial Art Gallery, in the Docent Gallery, in the presence of his absolutely spectacular and brilliant work of art, the 613, which brings together 614 paintings. I was going to give a more formal introduction to Archie tomorrow at his artist lecture. But I do want to say just a couple of things about him so you get a little bit of context. Archie is the presidential professor of art at Brooklyn College. His art has been shown in over 100 exhibitions, too many to list here. His work is collected by museums such as the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Museum of Modern Art, the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Art Institute of Chicago, the Baltimore Museum of Art, the Smithsonian Institution, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. I could go on and on. He is extremely well recognized as a pioneer among artists who work with Jewish subject matter and content. He is recognized as a maverick and as a pioneer for having developed an iconography of Jewish art, which is something that didn't exist until Archie Rand came around. And I guess that's about 5,000 years or so of no iconography for Jewish people. So with that, I want to say welcome, Archie.
Thank you.
I want to let everyone know who is viewing this on their computers or on their phones, what have you, that we are observing CDC guidelines and New York State regulations and guidelines as regards proper social distancing. So I'll be chatting with Archie, but I won't be next to Archie. That helps us keep in line with those guidelines, but also it's helpful for the audio. So we're each mic'd and we don't want there to be too much echo and reverberation for you at home. So Archie, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jonathan. I appreciate very much not only the acceptance of this work at the Memorial Art Gallery, but the incredible installation, which feels to me as if it's a religious installation like, the Ajanta Caves or a Masaccio mural. It really is beautifully surrounding, sort of the way I hoped, but never really had any reason to believe that it would be made manifest. And here it is. So I'm very grateful to you and to the Memorial Art Gallery and to Joan Brookbank Projects for promoting this work. Thank you all very much. It's really wonderful to be here.
Well, we're here to have a tour, really, to be with you amongst these 614 paintings. And there's no agenda other than we're dying to hear what you have to say and show us and share with us. No, as you know, no script. I don't have any questions for you right now. Where would you like to begin?
Well, I could begin with the genesis of this work. I started as a young painter wanting to be a secular modern artist. And at the time, that coincided with the notion of the very large scale painting. That was something that was championed by the followers of Jackson Pollock and Barnett Newman and Mark Rothko. And these were people, aside from Pollock, whom died when I was 6 years old, but I had met Rothko, I had met Newman, and their successors were people that Clement Greenberg would assemble around him. And I was fortunate at a very young age to be the studio assistant for Larry Poons, still a good friend and a very, very good painter. And Larry was working on very large scale pictures. And by large scale, I mean 16, 18 feet. And I developed a series of paintings when I was about 17 or 18 called the letter paintings. This is all germane to the 613, but I thought I would give you some introduction to it. And the letter paintings were paintings that were done rather like on a scroll, not unlike the scroll that the Memorial Art Gallery has installed for the children to work on, like a Torah scroll. And some of these paintings range to be an entire bolt of canvas, 150 feet long. And on these paintings, I would write the names mostly of African-American musicians that meant a lot to me as a young person. And the idea of scale was something that was always very important to my production. It was also consonant with the zeitgeist of the times. Abstract painters like Jules Zalitsky and Helen Frankenthaler and Ken Noland or color field painters were the people who basically brought me up when I was a teenager. They were very kind to me. And in 1972, I had an exhibition at the Tibor Denage Gallery where I had 10 abstract paintings that were modeled sort of on Jackson Pollock's Peggy Guggenheim mural. And the titles of those 10 paintings were based on the 10 rabbis in the Jewish high holiday service of Yom Kippur. There's a martyrology mentioning 10 rabbis who were at different times in history murdered or martyred. And I named the paintings with the titles of those 10 rabbis. I had been in the synagogue, and understand, I'm not an observant person. I went with my father, to share his company during the holiday services. And I read this chapter and thought, oh, I've got 10 paintings. Here are 10 names. So I named them all with the names of these 10 rabbis, and nobody noticed. In fact, there was a critic, a famous art critic at the time, whose last name was one of the names of these rabbis. And I talked to him, and he never made the connection. He never understood that his name was the name of one of these martyred rabbis. So although I knew that there were Jewish artists, Jewish critics, Jewish dealers, that the art world had no lack of Jewish presence at the time, it was simply not something that was either discussed or allowed in, unless it was done with some kind of cynicism. The way Larry Rivers, for instance, would invoke some Yiddishisms, or even today, people like Mel Bachner, will have those fetch paintings and things, which are kind of funny actually. So I thought that's interesting that nobody paid attention to these very odd names of paintings. I mean, there were paintings that were named like Yeshivav or something, and it occurred to me that this simply was something that people did not want to discuss. And that sort of struck something in my head, like, why is this not talked about? About 2 years later, I got a commission to mural the entire interior of an Orthodox synagogue. It was about 8,000 to 12,000 square feet of mural space. And thinking in terms of scale that I'd inherited from the abstract expressionist tradition, I thought, oh, this is great. I'm going to paint the biggest painting of any of my colleagues or any of my peers or any of my elders. And I had to do an enormous amount of research to get the kinds of images that the Orthodox rabbinate would accept. So I put up the requisite six-pointed star and the requisite menorah. And then I ran out of Jewish imagery. And I had 36 panels to go. And these panels were 10 feet high and 20 feet across, each one of them. And I said, oh my, I really don't know what to do. I have to invent a Jewish iconography, and I have to invent an iconography that will pass muster with these Orthodox rabbis. So I scurried off to a number of yeshivas, and I tried to study what I could about what was extant in not only Jewish scripture, but in iconography as well. And I found that there was really nothing, with the exception of people like Eliezer Sussman in the 18th century, who we have evidence of his paintings in Polish synagogues and the wooden synagogues, for a number of reasons, both internal and external, which I may in fact talk more about tomorrow. Judaism was basically an iconophobic culture. And I thought that was a void that could be filled. In the meantime, all of my contemporaries, and by all, I mean all, like all the young painters I was hanging out with, abandoned me like rats sinking a ship, because I was doing two things in these murals that were not considered acceptable. I was working figuratively, that is representationally, when everyone else was working abstractly. And I was working religiously, which was something that you simply didn't do. While that was happening, the rabbis revolted and decided that what I was doing was blasphemy. And they decided that I should be anything from murdered to excommunicated or something in between. And they took the case to the world's leading Talmudic authority, a man named Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. And Rabbi Feinstein looked at the pictures. I wasn't allowed into this trial because I wasn't kosher enough, but the rabbis came to either defend or to prosecute. And Rabbi Feinstein said that what I was doing was perfectly legal within the code of Jewish law. There was nothing wrong with making pictures. But the fact is that for 2,000 years, or since the discovery of Dura Europos in Syria, that images had not been found in synagogues, or at least narrative images. So he said I could do it. So I figured, oh, goody. Now there's going to be thousands of Jewish artists all over the world who now have the clean bill of health to make this stuff. And what I didn't figure on was that there was no clientele for this. Jews had no use for it, because to a Jew collecting art, that's an assimilative activity to be a normal person. And for a non-Jew, there's no use for it, especially with something like, which eventually became the 613, which is even obscure to Jews. So I found that I had been given the keys to a kingdom. The inhabitant rate was population 1, and that was me. And nobody else wanted it, nobody else did it. And the idea that it bothered so many people was interesting to me. I had two big supporters. I had the most popular of the Greenbergian color field painters, Jules Olitsky, who was very supportive. And oddly enough, about 1975, Philip Guston came to see the murals in progress. And he related what I was doing to the work he was doing in the WPA. And he was extremely supportive. And Philip and I became very close friends from 75 to 80. After the B'nai Yosef murals, I had an entire head full of iconographic information. And it was just too rich and too much to let lie. So I had been showing regularly with the Tibor Denage Gallery. And I was basically making abstract paintings, but after the B'nai Yosef murals, they started to become more and more representation. Philip Guston had me looking at, De Chirico and some of the fascist Italian painters like, Mario Serroni, and I became interested in the idea of making a solitary image, everything from Morandi to Savinio. And I started to turn out a series of works based on Jewish liturgy, Jewish scripture, for which there was no audience and no clientele. I just did them because I wanted to. In fact, about 1977, I brought a painting into the gallery that we actually showed. That was about 6 feet high and 4 feet wide, and the entire thing was sort of beige, done with a window squeegee. And in the middle of the picture, I had 2 lines that I had made with a thickened acrylic that I had forced through a pastry gun and made 2 lines. So basically, we're talking about a beige wall-colored painting, 6 by 4 feet, with 2 lines on it. Just 2 lines, like 2 lines made with a pastry gun. And Tibor looked at it for 5 minutes and scratched his head, true story, and said, "Archie, it's so complicated." That's the atmosphere into which I started to bring this figuration back into my work. But Philip's encouragement was great, and Olitsky's encouragement was great also. And as the work continued, I would do more and more serial works, breaking down the iconography into smaller panels and eventually making them larger and larger pictures that would be made of components or units, sort of what Orozco was doing that influenced Pollock, where he would take segmented pictures and congeal them into a larger mural-sized picture. And that's what I was looking at. I was looking at Orozco's movable murals. So I would do series that meant to be hung contiguously, as is the 613. I had done the 54 chapter paintings based on 54 chapters that the Jewish culture breaks the Torah into. And that continued to snowball into a large number of series. And about the year 2000, a friend of mine said, "What are you going to do now?" And I said, "I don't know. I need something so enormous that nobody would take it as a joke." And he said, "Well, there's 613 commandments." So that's where these come from. One of the problems with doing the 613 commandments is, first of all, many Jews, or I would say a majority of Jews, don't know that there are 613 commandments that were at first excised from the Torah by the sage Maimonides, and a couple of other rabbis have made some tweaks on it. So I'm dealing with a piece of very obscure Jewish information to begin with. The Orthodox, of course, understand this work, but the problem with taking it with the kind of seriousness that the Orthodox revere the 613 is that it would become a double negative. That is, if you take very serious work and you treat it very seriously, it's the lady doth protest too much. It's sort of like beating somebody over the head. So my friend Jules Pfeiffer said, if you want somebody to listen to something, you better be funny. So I thought that was very good advice. In fact, in the introduction to the book of the 613, I quote R.B. Kittai, who quotes Gershom Scholem writing to Walter Benjamin. And he says that no one will understand the work of Kafka until they understand the inherent comedy in Jewish culture. So that's what I took as my lead. And the first one is to know there is a God. It's up there on top. And I had to decide what kind of language I was going to use. And it occurred to me that the comic book industry was something that was a very Jewish industry. That is, artists in the 1930s and 40s, notably the great Will Eisner, were sort of exiled from the larger art culture. So they sort of went underground to this very disreputable industry called comic books. People who had great academic training, but really couldn't get arrested in the fine art galleries. And Eisner sort of invented the film noir attitude towards comics. And, he had people in his studio like Will Elder, Jules Pfeiffer, Stan Lee. They all worked for Will Eisner. He basically invented the medium. And I thought, well, comic book art of basically EC Comics, where Eisner was the godfather, although he wasn't involved with EC, is a language I can adopt as a Jewish visual metaphor. So a lot of these were taken from comic books. That particular image up there is from a EC artist, Wallace Wood. And it's an astronaut floating in space. And at that point, one should know that there's a God, or hope there is. The problem I also faced was a lot of these commandments are redundant, and the notion of illustration became not only unnecessary, but counterproductive. Because if you illustrate something, you're making it redundant to the verbal command. So the illustration replicates the verbal and therefore is subservient to it. So what I did was I did things that parallel the commandments, so that the combination of the verbal commandment and the visual component would make a third thing, almost like a poetry in a way, where these two things would collide and make a third image. For instance, people ask me, well, what does this mean? What does that mean? I'm looking at this giraffe over here. And the commandment that picture represents is not to take the name of the Lord in vain. So how does one illustrate that? Well, you don't illustrate it. What you do is you do something that will make people think, understand there's no history of Jewish iconography. So my job was to make images that people would remember, and then after the fact, link it up to whatever commandment it happened to represent. Now, when it says, do not take the name of the Lord in vain, and I have a giraffe, giraffes have no vocal cords, so they can't make any sound. So this is the kind of crazy abstract thinking that I was doing as I was working on these things. There were some other visual puns going on. I was working across many levels of interaction, like the way these scales mirror these parachutes over here. Just a visual, this is to give people honest weights and measures. Let's see. It's wonderful seeing them all up like this.
Archie, I have a question for you.
Of course, yes.
Why not, right? Someone from our audience asks, what about Marc Chagall? Did he create a Jewish iconography?
Yes, Marc Chagall is, again, I can talk for hours about this. Marc Chagall is one of my heroes. Marc Chagall usually is seen as somebody who made these candy-colored, light, silly Jewish type things that people in the suburbs hang in their house. Marc Chagall, if you look at it historically, was painting these 6-foot rabbis dressed in the ritual prayer shawl with the phylacteries, with tefillin on their head. I mean, deeply Orthodox rabbis, not small, 6 feet high, in a Paris that had just come out of the Dreyfus case, virulently anti-Semitic. Just the streets were full of Jew haters. And Chagall took a stand and basically said, he's a great predecessor for me, actually. He said, this is a culture that needs a visual representation, because until then, Judaism was and still is to some degree, a nomadic culture. And as such, you really can't hang around too long and have institutions with a visual, wall painting or something. Jews know that they're subject to uplift and movement. It's just a cultural understanding. And Chagall, very much like what's happening today, by the way, in the African American community, knew that if you didn't have a visual history, you had to invent one. So Chagall was a hero to me, and Chagall was doing what Jacob Lawrence would be doing, or for that matter, what Charlotte Solomon in Auschwitz was doing. That is, when you're totally removed from an understanding habitation or society or culture, when you're alone, you need to write a diaristic visual existence. And that's what Chagall was doing. And he did it his entire life. Not only that, he was fabulous at it. He invented a visual look, he invented a color sense, and he also, for the first time in anyone's memory, illustrated biblical narrative for a contemporary audience. With Goya and Manet, you really have the death of that. And after 100 years, he brought it up again.
So
Yes.
how would you then distinguish? Let's continue to walk through the space.
Thank you.
And how, Archie, then would you distinguish between a Jewish iconography and a Jewish subject matter, or a Jewish narrative, or the kinds of images that Chagall made?
Well, the Jewish subject matter and the Jewish narrative is derived from the verbal, from the written word. And if you think about what iconography isn't necessarily a translation of or an illustration of a narrative event, which is what Chagall was doing, and so brilliantly, I wouldn't dare touch it. But it's more like, St. Peter has the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Now, St. Peter does a whole bunch of things, but because Christ says to him, you have been given the keys to the kingdom of heaven, St. Peter is represented by the keys. Now, that's a totally abstract construct. Chagall does not do that. Chagall has no abstract constructs. He's a strict constructionist. And as such, there is a difference. Iconography is an invented symbol for a larger construct. An illustration, or what Chagall was doing, was a specific representation of a narrative text. Yeah.
Interesting. Another question, I may as well ask, because we've got
Sure.
a lot of people tuning in and they want to engage with you.
Sure. I must say there is some illustration here as well. I'm looking at that piece up there, and it says, do not contact the dead. And there's obviously some explorer type breaking into a mummy's tomb.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit more literal.
The color, what is the significance of this gold, or somebody, online it may appear mustard or beige, but what I'm seeing is really almost a metallic and reflective gold.
Well, I was very impressed by the medieval use of gold to imply the reflections, not only the reflections of the heavens, but of the splendor of the heavens. And any artist who's working with Jewish intentions has to understand that this is an intermarriage. That is, although it's allowed and it's even supported, if one reads about Betzalel in the Bible preceding Moses' reception of the Ten Commandments, there's no real history of it. So when I saw the gold, halos in medieval works, I thought that's a very fitting religious symbol that I can just, one way to say it would be steal, another way to say it would be adopt. But Jewish, somebody who's Jewish whose painting is involved in accepting the visual, not only traditions but techniques, approaches that have been given to us by the host culture, because we've basically been separated from that tradition for about 2,000 years. So that's where the gold comes from. The gold comes from everyone from, Czechoslovakian saint paintings. basically the same things that Warhol was looking at. There's a lot of
Right.
gold there. That's why there's a gold Maryland. And I saw these as being a spiritual construct, not necessarily a religious construct, because when you go through the Ajanta caves, you don't know what the religion is, and even those people who go through the Brancaci Chapel don't know specifically what story they're looking at when they look at Masaccio. I didn't think it was important that people be specifically familiar with the religious context of this, but just the notion that it was a spiritual construction. And as I mentioned before, the enormity of it kept it from being a joke. That is, it's one thing if you turn out, 20 paintings that, kind of look goofy and you can say that they're scriptural. But if you do 613 paintings, you're insane unless you're actually, trying to do something else. And what I wanted to do was make a visual, a physical equivalent of that kind of spiritual environment. In fact, the hanging here does it very, very, very well. As I was saying to Jonathan before, when I first saw that these were installed 4 units high as opposed to 10 units high, so you can literally see every one of them, I was amazed because I thought you're going to need hundreds of feet of running space to accommodate these. And in fact, that's what we have here. So you're really surrounded in this glow. And the paintings are painted matte, almost as if they were frescoes. And the gold is given a sheen. So from a distance, you can see a reflection of the gold bouncing off while the center images sort of recede behind them, almost like windows.
Archie,
yes.
Another question from the audience: are the Hebrew characters are numbers, or are they the actual?
They are numbers. In Hebrew, the letters represent numbers. So when you have 94, for instance, on this painting here, Hebrew is read from right to left. So that thing that looks like a crooked Y on the right represents the number 90. And the thing that looks like a 90-degree angle represents the number 4. Now, the thing that looks like a 90-degree angle is the 4th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So it's number 4. So that's painting number 94. And to make that clear, I put the Roman numerals up in the upper right-hand corner of these so that we differentiate what the Hebrew letters were saying.
And number 96, that looks to me like a portrait. Is that somebody you know?
Actually, yeah, but he doesn't know I painted him. There's a lot of in-jokes. I mean, again, when you're locked in a studio for 5 years doing this stuff, you tell yourself a lot of funny things. I was just looking at this guy up in the corner here with his with his head with his hand to his head and that rocket ship going off. And that particular one refers to wearing the phylacteries, the tefillin that I was talking about in the Chagall painting. So, the rabbis would go bananas when they saw this. They'd say, what does that have to do with anything? And the answer is, well, when you wear those things, they're supposed to act as spiritual transmitters. And as such, when you pray, it's supposed to break through the 7 layers of heaven and land at the feet of God sitting in his throne in heaven. So wearing the phylacteries, wearing the tefillin is sort of like that rocket ship blasting through the 7 layers of heaven. It gets to the point where your mind sort of works that way. It's like I said, you lock yourself in a room and other things happen.
You're an expressionistic painter, really. You're tapping into your. I mean, clearly you're an expressionistic painter, but when the thoughts that emerge, nonlinear thoughts, the associations, you're going with your gut and your internal messaging.
Yeah, a lot of that has to do with my relationship to Dustin. When I had met Philip, he was already in the middle of his late career, and he was looking at people like de Chirico and Morandi, metaphysical painters, and as such, that allowed me access to people that they were looking at, like Max Klinger, the symbolists. And I realized that a lot of this stuff is just spooky. It's I own a Klinger etching from the Glove series of a woman on skates who's leaning over at 45 degrees, as some skaters do. And all you're looking at that is well, it's, yes, somebody skating, and also it's incredibly precarious, and it's a spooky picture. And a lot of that allowed me to make this kind of exit. After about 1992, I did a series called 60 Paintings from the Bible, which I took scriptural illustrations and put contemporary word bubbles into the mouths of those people. I realized that the rabbis had no more authority to tell me what to paint and what to draw as I had been doing for 20 years previous, because I wanted to make sure that the work was kosher and Jewish. But they had no more authority to tell me what to do than they would, than they would have authority over a pork recipe, because there was no history of the visual for them to critique me on. So at that point, I had to become my own rabbi, and as such, anything that comes into your head becomes valid. Judaism, unlike a lot of other religions, is pretty loose and pretty liberal. I mean, again, not if you're Orthodox, but in the way that it's practiced in America, if your rabbi says something absolutely and you don't like it, you just find another rabbi. That's not true of most religions. Judaism is pretty flexible. So that allowed me entry into the kind of imaginative flights that I allowed myself to take on this. Because I was studying iconography for so long, I had illustrated almost every noun I could find in biblical commentary. That is, God sits in the throne, and the cloud around him is blue and the throne is red, so therefore the cloud must be purple or something. I had gone through all of this crazy legalistic stuff, and for 20 years I had been trying to illustrate it exactly. And after a while, I thought to myself, I got that down. There are other things like other religions have, like I mentioned, the keys of St. Peter, or the eyes of Lucy, or the two camels of St. Minos of Crete. There's thousands of saints with wonderful iconographic images. And I figured, it's too late to do the kind of 2,000-year evolution that at least Christianity has done, that basically kept art alive in Western culture for so long. So why don't I just, let it pop out of my head and let the chips fall where they may. If people remember an image, they remember an image, and then they'll look it up to see what it says.
Very specific question. We do have a question about number 118. Is that Babe Ruth?
No, it's not Babe Ruth, but that particular image refers to the holiday of Sukkot, where the observant people go through the ritual of shaking a palm branch and holding a very large lemon called an etrog. So the baseball bat represents that palm branch, which is about 4 feet high, actually, and the baseball represents the lemon. And that particular commandment is to observe the ritual of the palm branch and the etrog, of the lulav and the etrog. So that's another visual joke that I just decided to make up, but certainly no more irreverent than the keys of St. Peter.
Yeah, we're getting questions from people who are enjoying hearing you talk about the relationship of the commandment to the image. So if you could share another example or two, maybe different types of relationships, different mechanics of making meaning.
Sure. Well, again, these things range from the illustrational to the metaphoric. And like up here, I have an example where this one over here is, you should not have physical relationship with your sister, which of course is gross. And on this one, it says you shouldn't have a physical relationship with your mother. Now, this one is a straight illustration. And this one is a man sitting in a tree, cutting himself off, unbeknownst to himself, cutting the bough off the tree that he happens to be sitting on, which is the connection that one has both umbilically and metaphorically to one's mother. So the range of illustrational opportunities that I allowed myself are very vast. Some of them are straight illustrations, and some of them are metaphoric like that. I could probably go through a number. For instance, when I first showed these pictures in my warehouse in 2008, I think it was, I had a very large crowd of visitors come to see it, and an Orthodox rabbi came to see it, and he said, "What's this?" And I had a sheet printed up of what the commandments were, not unlike what's in the book, the 613. And he looked at this and he said, "Well, this is about the laws of menstrual purity." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "But that's an egg, and the egg is talking to this woman." And I said, yes. And he looked at me and he said, what does an egg have to do with menstruation? Now, you can't argue with that. It's like, you're just not going to get it, man. So like, um, it's, and he was furious, like, how dare I do something so sacrilegious as to paint that Humpty Dumpty character and talk about,
we have a question about, maybe you have another image that you were going to talk about, actually.
No, go ahead. Throw a question at me. Oh, well, I can talk about this. Yeah. This is, there's the story of the holiday of Hanukkah where they have the oil to light the ritual menorah in the temple. And a lot of the 613 are not able to be practiced. I mean, they're supposedly ethical laws, but a lot of them are also functional laws. And they can't be practiced because they're supposed to be practiced in the temple in Jerusalem, which hasn't existed for 2,000 years. But one of those commandments is to blend the sacred and holy oil. Well, you have to come up with an image like that. So basically I have, a blending of water over here with this diver going into it, essentially blending the two colors of the liquid that she's diving into. That's the kind of, after a while, you can go crazy if you try to illustrate everything, but I had done that for 20 years previous. So I decided not to do that on these, and it gave me a lot more latitude as to what it was I was able to approach. For instance, there's one over here that says, the high priest should not enter the temple with torn clothes. So here's a kid going into some space, and he's got a patch on his pants. Now, we don't have a high priest, and we haven't had a high priest for 2,000 years. But that's one way to get across the idea that the clothes are torn. So,
one very observant viewer tonight has figured out that the numbers go from left to right and all the way around.
Yes.
And then it's the next row, and then it's the next row. So is that the way you want people to view the 613?
The 613 I view as one painting. It's a mural. And as such, the imagery is scattered about. It's laid out in order so people can follow it. But since there's no real order, no logic to the order of the 613 as they exist in scripture, there doesn't have to be a logic here. But if you compare that to any other mural, if you compare that to like Delacroix's Death of Sardanapalus or any Thomas Hart Benton painting or all hell's breaking loose all over the place, it's really the same kind of thing. It's a massive allegorical construct, but it's a conceptual allegorical construct, which is even too complicated for me to think about. But it's basically one painting that represents the notion that these commandments have been culled from scripture and then sort of congealed into a notion of 613 mitzvot or commandments. And the specifics of it, as I mentioned before, are less relevant than the totality of it. But yes, they have to be laid out in order because they were left to us by Maimonides and succeeding rabbis with some variations in order. So they go up in order. They weren't even painted in order because I recognized from the very beginning that well, two things. One was technical and one was theoretical. First of all, I saw them as one gigantic mass of that was magnetically attracted to a nucleus, and that nucleus was the concept of 613. And the other is any painter knows, and I'm sure we have many painters watching or that will see this, is as you continue to paint something, your style changes. You get looser, you get more specific, you get more exact. And I didn't want the paintings as they were presented in order to go through that stylistic change, showing the artist's familiarity or boredom or increased observance as the paintings went along. So I painted them all at the same time. The studio was an absolute mess. I would work on number 325, then number 27, then number 502, until the whole thing felt like it was a mural. I'm basically a mural painter. And I wanted everything to have the same key of color, of rhythm. And in fact, they do. I'm very pleased looking around, seeing that in fact did work. It does work as a mural. There are no hot spots, no low spots. It's just a continual repetitive rhythm. It's something that's not dissimilar to uh, other Jewish cultural figures like Steve Reich or Philip Glass, where you just have this relentlessness. And there's something about the Jewish self-image that is in fact relentless. You know, there's a joke that on every Jewish holiday, you pour yourself a glass of wine and say, "They tried to kill us, we've survived, let's eat." And that's, you know, that's the description that Jews give of every Jewish holiday. Well, this is sort of like that. It's sort of like no matter what happens, it just goes on and it goes on and it goes on. I mentioned in the introduction to the book in the 613, and this is all an answer to the question about the order, that the Jewish liturgy, as recited in the Sabbath services, you read all 54 chapters. You read one chapter a week for an entire year, and when you get to the last chapter, the next week you read the first chapter. It's just this continuous Mobius strip, which is representative of how Jews sort of see themselves. You know, we just somehow or another we just go on. So this is also a picture about just going on.
There are a number of questions which I can answer about is there a guide? You know, how are we going to work our way through this exhibition? So there's a book called the 613. I think we've got about 16 copies here in the docent gallery. So you can carry one around with you and look at the translations of the commandments into English and get a sense for the heft of the tome, which it's a liturgical book in its own way, and it feels like one and it looks like one, except for the fact that these images are painted like comics, right, or like pulp fiction, paperback book covers, or and this is a segue for us to kind of maybe engage in our own conversation. I have a couple of questions that I've crafted in advance, and we can stand and walk, or we can sit as you like, Archie.
Yeah, we can sit.
All right, let's sit down. And I know you won't be offended when I say this, because you are an iconoclast. You are a bit irreverent in your thoughtfulness, and Roy Lichtenstein. There were a couple of questions from the audience. Go ahead, please. Have a seat, Archie. Roy Lichtenstein has been referred to by at least 2 or 3 of our viewers tonight. Did you know him? And because he painted in a comic book style as well. I am thinking of him right now because he famously said, when people say, "Why are you painting these comics on painting?" He said, "I'm trying to make the worst painting I can possibly make. I'm trying to be as bad a painter as I can be." And, despite the fact that you are an excellent artist, Archie, and these are excellent paintings, and I'm so excited, it's thrilling to hear you speak about this installation. I'm learning so much by being in this space with you, but let's face it, you're really trying to paint badly. And I wonder if there's a painting, well, now that we're sitting, but I mean, maybe you can think of one, like what's the worst painting here?
Well, I think they're all intentionally pretty bad. And the point is to be accessible. That is the problem with painting something well, is that if something is painted well, it's inherently bad, because what it's doing is it's asking the viewer to acknowledge the aesthetic construction, which ignores the narrative content. And you see that happen all the time. You go to Chelsea, you go to Soho, you go to museums, and you see many, many painters who want it both ways. They want the narrative to be understood, but they want you to also think that they're experienced, mature, good painters. So they're painted well, and when they're painted well, they do it at the expense of the narrative, because then the viewer has the option of not engaging the narrative. The viewer has the option of thinking, well, I don't have to think about this image, because all I have to do is pat myself on the head for recognizing this is a well-painted picture. And the artist, I will compliment the artist if I see him or her, And then the picture becomes a business card. It becomes a calling card. Like, hello, my name is blah, blah, blah. And this is my painting. Oh, you're a very good painter. Oh, thank you for recognizing I'm a good painter. Let's go off and have a drink. And the painting means nothing. So if the painting is painted as simply as possible, simply to get the action of the narrative across, then the viewer doesn't have the option of not engaging the picture. The viewer has to look just at what's there and not at the received quality of the information, which would get everybody, including the artist, off the hook. Lichtenstein was part of that wake-up call. I was very fortunate to be the sort of adopted kid of Clem Greenberg in that crowd. I was so young that I was like a mascot. They liked to have me hang around. And I realized that there was something extremely formalistic about it that inevitably curtailed imagination, free will, basically what it is that painters are supposed to do. So Lichtenstein, Warhol, and later even, Julian Schnabel, Jean-Michel Basquiat. These are people who basically, Francesco Clementi, these are people who weren't painting bad paintings to be bad. And I'll make a distinction in a minute. There were people who were trying to throw off the notion that one had to accede to certain academic truisms. Now, to this day in academia, people are taught certain things that they're told are basics, and then they can go off from there. But sometimes by the time people learn those so-called basics, they're stuck with them, and that continues to infect their work for the rest of their life. One of the distinctions I would like to make about bad painting is that the painters I have just mentioned were transgressing against something. Along with punk rock and a lot of newer additions to cultural attitudes, you got people, and this is as early as 20, 30 years ago, you got people like, Paul McCarthy, let's say, or Mike Kellett. And their notion was transgression for the sake of transgression. There was no history that they were bucking the way Lichtenstein and Warhol and even Basquiat were doing. It was simply the notion of transgression as subject. And, so the notion of bad painting is stuck in between that notion and the notion of Lichtenstein and Warhol, who turned out aesthetically commendable pictures, even though they didn't use traditional methods of making their work. Does that answer your question?
It does. It's a fantastic answer to my question, and we'll continue this conversation tomorrow at 2 p.m. I know. We are reaching the end of our hour. I want to say thank you very much, Archie, and I want to say a couple of things to our audience, because many people now are chomping at the bit and can't wait to get into the MAG to see this exhibition. Before we go today, I want to tell you how you can see the 613 by Archie Rand. You have to get a ticket in advance. So go to the MAG website, click on the button for getting your reserved timed entry ticket. If you're a member, the tickets are free. Use your email that you used when you set up your account, or set up your account using the email that we have for you. If you've changed your email, if there's some complication there, just give us a call in the membership office. We'll set everything right for you. But do get your tickets in advance. We're up to 50% now capacity in the galleries. We're very happy to be moving in the right direction. And of course, if you have any trouble, just let us know. The most important thing that I'd like to say right now is, there's two things. Archie, I want to thank you again for sharing your art and your intellect and your brilliance and your joy with us. And I want to say thank you to the Farish Foundation for their support of this exhibition, for helping to bring it to Rochester, for making it possible. This is a project that I was aware of when you first showed it in Brooklyn. I was living in New York City. And I read the article in the New York Times. I was absolutely fascinated by it. I regret that I didn't get to see it for those 4 hours or however long it was on view in Brooklyn. But when the opportunity came to bring this work to Rochester, I suppose it's the one of the benefits of being the boss. You know, it's like, yeah, I'd like to see that, and here we are. So I am. My expectations are far exceeded. I do love art with the conceptual conceit, if you will, art that goes well beyond the images on the wall, art that goes well beyond the people who happen to be talking about it at a given moment, art that goes beyond any kind of construct of understanding that we can attempt to apply to it. I mean, this is art that is always going to accrue new meaning, whether we add the meaning to it or not. And, you know, so I'm a bit overwhelmed and a bit thrilled, and I'm really psyched to have a few months to spend some time with this project.
I'm very grateful that it's here and that it has not only your support but your brilliant oversight. The installation is a thrill, and I'm very grateful to have the work here. So thank you very much.
You're welcome, and thanks to everybody for joining us this evening. We're so grateful for your support as members of the MAG. We look forward to seeing you in the galleries. We look forward to the parties of the future when we can all hang out and chit chat and nibble on cheese and drink wine and the rest of it. For the time being, we are very much in this Zoom world, and we will enjoy your company however we can get it. So thank you very much for joining us tonight and for making the MAG what it is.